Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today is the AFC South Preview. I'm joining with my father, and we have a lot to talk about here. We got brand new quarterbacks, teams on the rise, maybe teams on the fall. The best running back in the NFL, does he still have it? There's so much to discuss about with this division. So I'm just going to ask you right now, Tony, what are your thoughts on this division face value?
I think that the teams are definitely getting stronger. The draft classes that they had were pretty good, and they brought in a bunch of free agents as well. So I'm pretty pleased with the direction that the teams are taking to go up.
Yeah, and I don't think it's that hard for the Texans to say they've upgraded in the front office, which we'll get into in a bit. But it feels like each team has a clear direction of where they're going right now. And I think now it's time we jump into teams overall. And here's the question. So this is especially based off their draft class and how Chris Ballard's built this team. But can the athletes reign supreme on the Colts?
I think it will come down to coaching, really. I mean, I always say that athletes aren't always football players. I mean, I probably said that ad nauseum to you, but it's true.
All the time. That and defense wins championships.
It's true. But when you look at it, when we're going through the draft for the last few years, all you've ever heard is his measurables. Yeah, he's not there yet, but he's got all of the tools. And I'd say 80% of the time, those tools don't transition to being, star players in the NFL. And is that the player's fault? Is that the coach's fault? Is it a little bit of both? And I think in the long run, it's probably a little bit on everybody. And so your question, can athletes make this team rise? If they're coached properly and handled properly, there is so much upside to the draft that they had. That absolutely, but it's going to depend upon how well they come together and how well they're coached.
I'm a bigger Anthony Richardson fan than you. Probably helps that the Gators are on my team, so I've watched him play. He was clearly a guy that probably should have stayed in college for another year, and I don't think that's disagreeable. I know some people think he's better in the pocket than others, in which you may have that point because the receiving talent in Florida was lackluster last year, to say the least. But I think you look at these guys overall, there is something in this receiver room for Richardson to work with. Alec Pierce, Michael Pittman, the newly drafted Josh Downs, Jelani Woods, a tight end. They have talent around him, and thankfully we're recording this the day after it was just announced. And I'm going to ask you, what do you think about them moving off Jonathan Taylor for draft picks?
I think it's basically team chemistry now. Sadly, there was a falling out between, upper management and, his team. And no matter what, obviously the team doesn't think that even if he does come back, that the damage will ever be repaired the correct way. So I think that the biggest obstacle for him is making sure that he's going to go to a team that'll pay him what he thinks he's valued at, and the team also giving up enough draft capital to get him, because let's face it, I mean, he's a year removed from being the best running back in the NFL with over 1,800 yards. So he's definitely young enough. His body shouldn't be breaking down as of yet. And I just think that it was handled probably poorly by both sides, sadly.
Yeah, and I think when you look at this running back room after Taylor, you got Zach Moss coming off an arm injury, Jake Funk, Deion Jackson, Kenyon Drake, Evan Hall, Jason Huntley. They're not replacing Jonathan Taylor this year. They can maybe find a guy in the draft next year, but the immediate replaceability is not there unless they get someone in the trade back. And that's going to lead me to asking this. Do they get the first-round pick they want, or do we see something similar to the Christian McCaffrey trade we saw last year with the Panthers and 49ers?
I would think that they probably would not get an overall first round draft pick. But if you remember about 2 weeks ago, when this news started coming up and all the sides were unhappy, I had thrown a text to you about Taylor to the Cowboys and the Colts could get Pollard back. And I know that Dallas Cowboy fans like Pollard, but as far as I'm concerned, Jonathan Taylor is a much better option. If you did that trade and then you'd only have to give up minimal draft compensation, what are your thoughts on that?
So I don't like the trade for the Colts. I think it'd be a home run hit for the Cowboys because I'm a Tony Pollard fan. I've been on his train for how many years now? 2 years? 2, 3 years?
Yeah.
I'm a big Tony Pollard fan, but he's no Jonathan Taylor, which I think the running back getting back in the trade is a valuable piece for the Colts. So I do think that is possible, especially if both sides want him out of there. And another team I'd like to throw at you, what about the Chargers trading Austin Eckler and some draft picks to them for Jonathan Taylor?
That's actually one that I hadn't considered as well. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. The only thing is do you think the Chargers would actually use him properly?
I would say yes, because we saw Kellen Moore use Ezekiel Elliott in Dallas, and Zeke is a good pass protector, but he didn't have that burst that Jonathan Taylor has now. When you have a guy like Jonathan Taylor, you're going to use him.
Then that's fair.
Yep. And I think the last thing we have to talk about is this Colts defense. It still has a lot of good pieces. It still has a lot of good everything, but can you rely on them to stay healthy? Shaq Leonard is coming off injury-riddled season last year. Their secondary lost Stephon Gilmore. Is this a team that you think will have a very good defense, or is it going to be a bit more middle of the road with some younger, newer pieces coming in, slotting in?
I think that they're going to have to build back up. You know, they've got some core pieces, Buckner in the middle, but we still don't know about how healthy Leonard is. So that's a big question. When he is on that defense, they are lights out, and when he's not, there are some big gaps, right? So they did bring in some people, in the draft, and they brought in some pass rushers. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
That's going to lead me to my next question. Do you see some ascension for Kwity Paye, or is he just? Do you think he's just not meant for the Gus Bradley system?
That's a good question. It just depends upon the role, right? Because Gus Bradley's system is basically, penetrate from the defensive line. You want to penetrate and hold so that the linebackers can make the plays and the secondary holds strong, right? So if he can get that, then absolutely. It's just a matter of the technique. And sometimes players don't do well with specific techniques, whether it's you're going to, two gap or single gap, or if you're going to hold a front, it just depends. Sometimes players struggle with that.
Okay. Now going back to the offense side of the ball, and it's clear to say the downfall of the Colts last year was offensive line. Did they improve it this year, or do you think the young pieces coming in are another year in the NFL that they'll be able to progress as the season goes along?
Well, you would hope that the team is healthier, right? They had a lot of injuries on the offensive line last year. God, I think that's just a theme this year when we've been going through teams. Half the teams had a myriad of injuries on the offensive line, it seems, last year. And all the teams struggled, right?
Well, it's a physical position that's going to grind you down.
Absolutely. But bringing in Freeland and who was Jake Witt? Is that the other guy's name?
Give me a quick second. But Freeland, as you say, though, he was kind of the athletic tackle that some teams have been targeting in recent years. to get him out on the outside and use.
If you're going to try and let Anthony Richardson, move around in the pocket and, run when he doesn't feel, then having athletic tackles isn't the worst thing in the world that can get out and protect him. You can pull, you can run stunts. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. They've got a great center. They got a great guard. So their offensive line should be solid. Are they going to be where they were a couple years ago? Probably not. Short term, maybe long term.
Yep, and that's very fair. And now it's time to move on to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think the big question with them is, can Trevor enter the realm of Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Josh Allen as the elite quarterbacks in the NFL?
I'd say the last, 6-7 games of the year last year, he was there. The one thing that's going to help him more so than probably anything else is to have a dynamic one, right? You think about it, Mahomes had Tyreek, and he's got this guy, Kelsey, that's pretty good too.
The Bengals have 15 number one wide receivers, I swear.
They have a couple. Herbert's got a couple of really, really dynamic wide receivers. So whenever you're looking at wide receivers and quarterbacks, whenever you're talking about whether the quarterback is, in the top 5, say, or whatever else, usually they've got a receiver that is helping them get there. And so bringing in Ridley, I think will do a lot to put him in that upper echelon. Look what he did last year with a bunch of
twos.
Exactly. And some would argue a couple of them shouldn't even be twos.
No.
But he did really well after he stopped trying to play hero ball.
Yep.
So,
and I'm going to bring this.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'm going to ask you this because I see a lot of people whenever you say Trevor took steps last year, they always go back and say he was horrible in the wild card game against Chargers. He threw 4 picks, but he did come back in the game and won. Do you view that as a negative with him throwing 4 picks, or a positive that he mentally put that to the side and led his team on a comeback in a playoff game to win?
Can it be both? I mean, let's face it. He threw 4 picks. Not good. A couple of those weren't his fault, right?
No.
But he's still when he gets it in his head, a lot like how we talked about Josh Allen, in the last when he gets it in his head that he has to basically do everything, that's when he makes mistakes. He doesn't have that killer instinct that Mahomes and Burrow and even Rodgers had, right? Or let's face it, who had the best killer instinct of all time?
Brady.
But he was able to compartmentalize that though, and bring his team back. And he brought his team back the way they'd been winning for the latter part of the season as a team. He was dispersing the ball all over the place, hitting the guy that was open. And, if he does that, he's gold.
Yeah, and that's going to bring me to the next thing is, what about this young defense in Jacksonville? They have so much talent, but it just seems like they're yet to gel together. Do you think this is the year they gel, or is it they have to bring in some pieces that fit a bit better?
Once again, when all you're doing is bringing in athletes, sometimes athletes don't work well together. A lot of times you need the lunch pail workers to help put everything together, and they don't have too many lunch pail workers. They've got all guys that are, just standouts, right, in college and in high school. And so you got to have those guys that are willing to get in there and do the dirty work so that others can shine.
I think it's safe to say Travon Walker had a disappointing year for a first overall pick last year. Would you say that's correct?
Once again, he was drafted on what? Measurables, right?
But do you see him taking a step forward this year, or is he just kind of what he is, a great athlete, but maybe not going to give you the best production, which is something that was labeled with him through the pre-draft process.
I would venture to say he is probably going to take huge strides this year. You have to remember that what he was doing in college was nothing compared to what he was asked to do last year, right? And so it's definitely a learning process. He's had a year under his belt, the same system, same coaching. So I think that he'll be better. Is he going to be, an all-pro? He's got all the ability to. It just depends on if he can put it down on paper and on game day.
Yep, and that's fair. And there's not really a whole bunch to add for the Jaguars because they are similar to the team they were last year. They just need their young guys to take a step forward, and they can be in that realm of contention with the Chiefs, the Bills, the Bengals, the Chargers even. But we need to see those young guys progress. Now here comes the popping champagne bottles if you hear in the distance. What is life without Jack Easterby for the Texans? And is this the greatest news in Houston football since the Texans were brought back? A team was brought back to Houston.
Absolutely. To be quite honest, I think this is the second biggest story, right behind ownership changing in Washington, because the man was literally
a cancer.
So, yeah. I like I said, I think that it's huge, and they brought in dynamic personalities for for coaches. They did really well with addressing a lot of issues in the draft. So when you have such a big change, is it going to turn around overnight? No, because everybody is like on pins and needles because of that culture. We heard it just a couple of weeks ago in Washington, how Bieniemy was coaching, right? Some of the players were like, well, that's not how we've always done things. And it takes a while for a culture to become ingrained in a new area. And I think that in Houston, it's going to be the same way. People are going to be like, oh, that's not how we normally do things. And they're going to be watching and looking over the head. And one of the things that can help alleviate that is an influx of new people that don't know how the old happened.
So that brings me to the next question, similar with what we saw in Washington, especially if you watched Ravens Commanders last night. We're recording this on Tuesday. The fan base was into that game. I don't know if I've seen a Washington fan, like the Commanders, whatever you want to call them, into a game in my lifetime. I've grown up with Dan Snyder owning them. But we saw it was just this fresh wave, and the fans were in support, and they were loud for a preseason game. Do you see similar fan support just coming back to the Texans because Easterby's no longer there?
Probably. I would say that it's more localized there than in the entire NFL with result to, coaching there. But I would say that if they can start turning things around, I think it'll be a little slower, simply because now they have to rebuild a fan base again, basically. Whereas the Commanders will always have fans that were Redskins fans and fans that were Washington football team fans that are just following along, and they've been, decades and lifelong fans. Whereas it's a relatively young franchise. They went through a period where they were really, really good, and they had Watt, and they were dynamic, and they had Watson, and they had Hopkins, and
Clowney.
They were Clowney, right? Yeah, exactly. And so they had all these players, and so they had all this buy-in, and they had these fans, right? And then Easterby basically, was the poison pill. And so they didn't have that ingrained, I'm a Redskin / Commander / Washington football team / whatever their new name is going to be, a lifetime of that, So it'll take them a little while to build back up and get fans back on board. But we follow a couple guys on social media that are huge Houston Texan fans, and just listening to them talk about the relief, I think that says it all. It's the people that are diehard Texans fans will come back in droves,
which is important, and especially because they're also bringing back J.J. Watt to induct in the Ring of Honor, which might not seem like a big thing, but having him back will also help with just, if you can get him around this team, is there a better mentor to have with young players than J.J. Watt?
No, absolutely not. And so this is kind of funny, and I'm going to jump to an entirely separate team. If you remember when the Seahawks were on top, and then they started losing their Legion of Boom players, and a lot of the other players, the Michael Bennett's and the Cliff Avrils, and the Cams and the Shermans and everything else. And there was a lot of resentment when those players were leaving, and they were going on to other teams. And after you have issues that get resolved, when these players start coming back, right, then it lets the fan base know that that this culture is here to stay, and so it wasn't as bad. And so the fans come back more in droves. Like as a Seahawks fan, I listen to that all the time now. Everybody's back on board because they hear all about how Sherman's helping coach in the backfield, and how Bennett's on the D line, and all these things. And it's the buy-in from the old to the new. So when you bring back, arguably, I'm not even going to say arguably, when you bring back the best player in Houston Texans history, and they are there to not only help be a face of a franchise, but help with the new players and bring the old to new, I don't see where that can be a bad thing at all. And it's J.J. Watt, and he's probably got more buy-in because of his philanthropy work than any other player that I can name off the top of my head.
No, he is Mr. Texan, and that's going to bring me to now asking about the new Mr. Texan, the former player that's now their head coach. What does DeMeco Ryans bring to them? Now, I know you're a big Lovie Smith fan, and I think a lot of Texans fans love Lovie for getting rid of Easterby, maybe not for not getting the first overall pick. But does this move for DeMeco bring in some of the 49er players, but kind of fix that defense and get back to the J.J. Watt, Jadeveon Clowney, Whitney Merciless era Texans of when their defense was just going to murder you?
Well, it's a different defensive philosophy, right?
It is, but it's like that. Houston's feared for defense is what I'm trying to get across.
They very well can be. I mean, look at some of the players that they brought in. He brought in speed, and he brought in accountability, right? There were a lot of people, let's face it, a lot of people were like, you can't take Jalen Carter because of all his off-the-field issues, right? So you bring in Will Anderson, who is beyond amazing, but he is the quintessential teammate and the quintessential worker. So he's bringing in players that are going to build, once again, a culture. And that culture is going to be work ethic and, accountability.
So, do you know Will Anderson was the first true freshman to start on Alabama's defense since Minkah Fitzpatrick?
I believe you told me that just the other day.
Do you know how impressive that is when you look at all these guys who have come through Alabama, and Nick Saban said he's worthy to start as a true freshman?
Well, it just shows that, once again, you can have all the talent in the world because Alabama, Georgia, they're 5-star recruit central. They bring in 5-star recruits. Athleticism is one thing, but getting the game is something entirely different. And Anderson is obviously one of those 5-star recruits that not only is he a freak athlete, but he gets the game as well.
Yes, and this season, as much as we want to talk about the defense, it's really about one player, and that's the development of C.J. Stroud. Now, what do you think about C.J. Stroud in the offense he's going to be in, because it's going to be a 49ers-based offense, and what do you think about the weapons they have around him? Would you like to see them maybe add someone, or do you like the guys around him right now?
I think they've got some playmakers. There's no doubt about it. I love their running back. So
not as much as me.
That is true. That is true. But let's face it. Robert Woods was pretty darn good as a Ram in this system, right? So bringing him in is nothing but good. And then they brought in Devin Singletary. Another running back that will be well in the system, because we all know that in this system, running backs go down, right? So having backup running backs is a good thing. But they've got, from everything that I've heard, the players that they've got on offense have been making plays in practice. It's just going to be a matter of getting it onto the game film. So only time's going to tell if they have the right guys, because it's a yak-based offense, right? You need to catch the ball, usually short to intermediate passes, and then that's where you're going to explode. And so do they have the players there? We'll wait and see.
Yeah, there's one last thing I want to ask about the Texans before we move on to the Titans. And do they have maybe the most underrated offense line in the NFL?
Let's face it, they have the most underrated everything in the NFL, because they've been bad for so long that most fans won't know who's on the team.
Yep. So that's just being underrated, does that lead to potential upsets, and maybe they finish higher than a fourth or third place finish? Could they finish second in this division if these pieces gel well together?
I don't think that they'll finish second. I have too much respect for a couple of the other teams in this division, but they can definitely be a spoiler in some games.
Yep. Well, that's going to move us on to the Tennessee Titans, and there's a lot to talk about this team, and some good, some bad. But let's talk about the good, and that's they probably got their offense lineman of the future. Now, I did see something that is Skoronski playing left tackle or guard for them, because I've seen a bit of mix between some stuff.
I heard the other day that he was playing tackle, but I saw some highlights and it looked like he was playing guard as well. So, he's probably just going up and down the line.
Put your best five on the field. I get it. So, but my question with the Titans is, does this aging team and aging Derrick Henry keep them in the ability to make a late season push for the playoffs? Because they've had injury issues the past couple of years. Ryan Tannehill has never been known to being the healthiest guy, and Derrick Henry has been having lower body injuries. Is that a concern for this team this season, or do you think that's more of a year or two down the line?
One of the things that I think that's going to help.
Oh, cut out.
A running back that is better suited to back up Henry and give him some reps in Spears. So they have to work on their depth, because for the last few years they've had Henry. They didn't utilize Foreman nearly as well as I think they could have. And I guess part of the problem there is, if you've got Derrick Henry, why would you want to put him on the bench, right? So that's definitely an issue. But they've been working on depth, bringing in Andre Dillard, and actually bringing in some receivers that you're not going to be pounding him as much. I think Hopkins can help out a lot, simply because as old as he's getting, and he's not old, I understand that, but I look at him more of a position like how Fitzgerald, Larry Fitz, started, at the later end of his career, where they were mainly using him as a possession receiver. And I think that Hopkins can be a safety valve.
The Hopkins move said one thing to me. We regret trading A.J. Brown.
Well, if their fans didn't know that by now, I don't know what, because their receivers last year sucked. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. And I I don't have a lot of faith in this team when it comes to talent. A lot of it's aging, a lot of it has injury issues. But there is one guy on this team I look at, and I do think he's the best player on the Titans. I think he's one of the best players in the NFL in general, and that's Jeffrey Simmons. Do you think Simmons kind of becomes more of the household name and contends for a Defensive Player of the Year award this year?
No.
Really?
No, and the reason why is because of their market. They're not a huge media market. So no matter how dominant he is, he's not going to get the notoriety nationally that some players would. I mean, if you're going to look at a defensive tackle that is, dynamic, you're looking at, both the Jets and the Giants have one, right?
Aaron
What is
Donald.
what is Philly going to do? LA, exactly. The defensive player of the year, offensive player of the year, it is media driven. And so your media markets are not in Tennessee. They're in New York. They're in California. They're in Texas, right? So where your viewership is. And as good as he is, I just don't see it.
Would you agree with me, though, that he's the best player on the team, or do you still think that is King Henry's title?
I'd say he's the best player on the team.
Hear that, Titans fans? You got a new stud. Well, not new if you watched him last year. That dude was amazing. And I think there's one other thing we have to talk about, because they did improve their O-line, but it's, as you said, it's a lot of depth pieces that we're just unsure of. Can Tannehill stay healthy? And if he goes down, what do you do at the quarterback position? Because Malik didn't show a whole lot last year, and Will Levis is a guy who needs to develop and sit.
That's a good question. I know that Malik has been showing some things in the preseason. If Tannehill goes down, I think it'll be Levis up next. My reasoning for that is because Malik's been showing things in the preseason. He showed some things in the preseason last year as well, if you remember. But when it's time to go up against defenses that are going to, stretch your imagination and throw things at you quicker and different, I think that's where he had trouble last year. And I think that Levis actually has, just more experience in those kinds of things.
Okay, hear me out. Would you do this trade? Malik Willis to the Steelers for Mason Rudolph and, let's say, a 4th-round pick. I feel like that's fair, because then you would have someone who has NFL game experience, so you wouldn't have to start the rookie who needs to develop. And this front office was not the people that drafted Willis. They could go out, they could get a guy to back up Tannehill, develop Levis, and an extra draft pick as well, while the Steelers already have a guy who can be behind Kenny Pickett and Mitch Trubisky.
I mean, it's a feasible numbers wise, but to be quite honest, I don't see why either team would do it. For one, if you're Pittsburgh, you're loving what Pickett is. Why are you going to bring in another guy?
It's a dynamic to the room. For example, like when you play the Ravens, you'd have someone who can scrimmage Lamar Jackson in practice, which can help. And let's say if Pickett does go down, you can use Malik in different packages, and I'm pretty sure teams can now have 3 quarterbacks on game day no matter what, so you could use him in sub packages, wildcat, anything to get a splash.
Well, you can have them, but they have to be on your 53, so now you're carrying an emergency quarterback, but he has to be named on your 53. All right? Then the only problem is he he can come in, but he has to go back out if one of the other. I don't, like I said, it's completely different play styles between Pickett and Malik. Like I said, I don't see the feasibility of it. Maybe I'm just not imaginative enough, but I don't see the feasibility of that.
I think Malik is someone we see traded, but after the cut down or something. That's what I think happens. I think the Titans will go in and bring in a veteran quarterback. So I was looking at teams. I saw Mason. I'm like, well, the Steelers are known to target guys they went to the pro days of. It is possible, but there are also other options. Maybe a team like the Giants would make a move, and they could get someone there, or a guy gets cut, you go pick up, he's your backup. That's just my thought process with that.
Yeah, no, like I said, I don't like switching an entirely different play style in your offense. If you need somebody to pretend to be, Lamar, then have a guy on the practice field be Lamar, right?
It's kind of hard to find a guy on practice field that can be Lamar Jackson. But that's going to kind of wrap us up with the Titans, unless you have anything else you want to add.
No, that's good.
Now it's time to go coaching staff rankings, and this was hard for the top two. I think we'll agree with the third and fourth team, but I'm just going to list mine off. Fourth place at the Colts. Too much experience at the head coach position. It's brand new. Staff, I'm a little bit questioned about. Gus Bradley's retained. I know what he is. I don't know what anyone else is. Third, I have the Texans. I'm higher on DeMeco Ryans as a head coach. I like the staff he brought in, but there's still question marks all over, which has him third place. Second, I have the Titans. I have a lot of respect for Mike Vrabel. I think he's a very good coach. I think he gets his team to the playoffs. I think he is kind of a Tomlin-esque of guy who's going to squeeze blood from the stone and get as much out of his team as possible. And first, the reason I gave Doug Peterson the nod at first place in their overall staff was because he has a Super Bowl ring, and the Super Bowl is very hard to get.
Fair enough. Ironically, we don't agree as much this week as we did last week. So I have the Texans as 4. And the reason why is because even though I love DeMeco as a defensive coordinator, he's not their DC. He's the head coach. And sometimes we don't know the difference there. So between, the coaches, I think I'll give DeMeco the nod, between him and the coaches, right? Between him and Steichen. I'll give DeMeco the nod there. But for the coordinators, I like the Colts coordinators better right now than I like the Texans coordinators. So I'll give 3 to the Colts. I put the Jags at number 2. I love their class.
Coaching staff.
Their coaching staff. But I am a Vrabel homer. I think he's an amazing coach. When his team has issues, he's very Tomlin in this way. When they're bad, he still makes them relevant, as opposed to Peterson. When things get bad, things went really bad, right? And so I just think that Vrabel's a better coach. I really do.
That's fair, and it's overall hard to judge because Vrabel doesn't have a star quarterback like Doug Peterson has. That being said, we can all agree Doug Peterson's a major upgrade over Urban Meyer. Good job, Jacksonville.
Yes.
Yep, and now it's time to go draft class, which is probably where you have some arguments. My fourth place is the Titans. Third, I have the Colts. Second, I have the Jaguars. First, I have the Texans. Might I say, I don't think that any of these classes were bad. There were some picks I didn't like, which is why the Titans ended up last. If you heard me in the pre-draft process, I wasn't high on the guy they took in the second round. But overall, I didn't think the class was bad. Colts, I think it had some splash. They took some guys I really like, but it's a big question mark because they took so many athletes. The Jaguars, they got guys later on that I do like. I love Parker Washington. They had a lot of picks, and I think they used them very well, addressing depth issues, bringing in some talent, bringing in a second running back, getting him starting off at tackle. Really like that. And the Texans are one because they got the 2 most important positions on the football field wrapped up. They took a center who looks very good. They got a wide receiver who looks very good. And Henry Tutu is a guy I could see end up becoming someone very good in the DeMeco Ryans 49ers-esque defense system.
Well, we've got a couple. So I as well have the Titans with the like of the four, they're the bottom of the draft class. I like the Skoronski pick. I think he was great. I love Tajay Spears, and I like Josh Wiley, although he has been struggling, right? So I really liked that class. Second or third for me for draft ranks is the Jags. I liked some of the guys they got in. I mean, Anton Harrison. I think he can be solid. Brenton Strange.
Are you gonna mention the Jaguars' last pick with the best last name in all of football?
Your brother, Derek Parrish.
I wish I'd be rich. I mean,
your brother, right? Fullback. Okay, but Brenton Strange. I think that I think he was taken too high, in my opinion. Tank Bigsby, he's pretty darn good. But I really like where they got Yasir Abdullah. So
do you want me to mention Ventrell Miller real quick, because I have a lot of experience watching him?
Yeah, go for it.
So Ventrell Miller was someone I think really, really was the Gators' best player last year, better than Anthony Richardson in my opinion. Because when he was playing football, the Gators' defense was better. He was good on the run, he was decent in the pass, but he was very good on rush defense. The problem was he kept on getting hurt, and that's what kind of dropped him down the fourth round, in my opinion, is because he kept on getting hurt throughout his entire Florida career. I think if he stays healthy, I think it's a high possibility he's a second or first round pick even. He has all the tools, all the talent. The question is, can he stay healthy? And if he does, he will be great for the Jaguars, stuffing the run for many years to come.
That's fair. So now we have, for my second rated team, and this is where you and I kind of mix things up, I have the Texans. And so here's the reason why. I love Stroud. In fact, I'm on several recordings saying that I thought the Stroud should have been the number one overall pick. And I think he'll in the long run will be the top rated quarterback out of this draft class. They got Will Anderson. We've already talked about how amazing he is. Juice Scruggs. I love me some Juice. Okay. And they got Tank Dell, receiver, he's awesome.
The most misleading nickname ever in the world.
Yes, absolutely. Toa, I think I was higher on him than you. Patterson, I don't know. I think they're going to move him to guard. So we'll wait and see.
Now, here's a question about Patterson. If the draft cycle happened earlier in the year, how much higher would he have gone? Because he seemed like a guy everyone had pegged as a second-round pick early on.
Well, absolutely. But that's look at how people move up and down the draft board, right? So you have a couple of games where you struggle, look at prime example. Look at Brzee, where he was slated early in the year versus where he ended up being, right? And it's because he had a bad year, and whether it's coaching or not, we'll soon find out. But the draft makes, your on-field performance makes all the difference for the draft. But ultimately, when I look at these two teams, and yes, the Colts gave up quite a bit to move up, they didn't have to move up. No, I'm sorry. The Colts stayed where they were at. They got Anthony Richardson, right? Houston gave up an awful lot to get, their two number ones. And Richardson, I'm higher on Stroud. Julius Brents, I love Julius Brents. Josh Downs, I think he can be explosive. Freeland, yeah. Okay. Adebawore, getting him in the fourth round, getting Darius Rush in the fifth round, Evan Hull. I just think that they went out and got some guys that are going to make an impact, and they didn't have to give away next year's draft, right? So do I think that they're going to be contending for a playoff spot this year, like some people have said in the media. Nope, I sure don't. But they're going to be able to draft high again next year, whereas Houston, they're giving their potentially high round draft pick to, Arizona.
See, that's where we disagree. Is I don't think the Texans' first round pick they gave to Arizona will be as high as the pick they'll be using in the draft. But before we move on, there are a couple guys I want to talk about. Peter Skoronski could possibly be the biggest impact day one starter in this entire class. I don't think that's up for debate. Long haul, Richardson or a CJ Stroud can be that guy, but when you look at positions easier to adjust NFL, offense line tends to be a little easier than the quarterback position, so I could see him have an immediate impact in helping the Texans clear out rushing lanes. AR, I've said a lot of things about AR. I am a fan of him. I hope he does well. He is the guy I'm cheering for the hardest to make it in this class. I loved him at Florida. There are concerns I have for him. His accuracy is one of them, but if he puts it together, I think he can be good. Julius Brents, I did love. I thought it was a good cornerback selection. I think he can do very well in Indianapolis and develop under Gus Bradley, who has had a history of working with corners with athletic traits getting to the next level. My favorite pick of their class for the Colts was by far Josh Downs. I was probably the highest person on Josh Downs, if I'm correct. I don't think a single...
Well, considering you wanted him taken in the first round.
I still maintain he should have been a first-round pick, and we're going to get into another guy I had a high grade on. Josh Downs is something special, if you ask me. He really, really reminded me of young Antonio Brown in Pittsburgh. There was just that route running ability, his breaks in and out of routes. There was something there. I think it was a great pick. I overall think he'll do very well. Now, if you want to talk about a guy I was higher on than everyone else, I think you know exactly where I'm going. Parker Washington. What's the number one thing a wide receiver needs to do? Catch the football. Parker Washington's hands are so good. They're so good. I think he'll be their slot receiver by the end of the year. I wouldn't be surprised if he was their number 2. He is very talented, very gifted, and he'll be a great safety net for Trevor Lawrence on third down when he needs to get the ball to someone to pick up the first. Texans, we could spend hours talking about CJ Stroud, Will Anderson. You love Juice Scruggs more. I think you could talk for 5 hours on him straight. Tank Dell is very interesting because, as you said earlier, the offense that the Texans will be running is going to be very catch and run base. Now, when I first heard the name Tank Dell before I watched him, and I think you did the same thing, I pictured this 6'4" behemoth that was a jump ball receiver. I watched him. He was not that. He was a route runner, very quick, very in and out of routes, very 49ers-esque, which is why I think he fits perfectly in this new system that the Texans are bringing over. And Xavier Hutchinson does intrigue me a bit. He was someone I was iffy on. I thought he could be good. I thought he could be on the practice squad at the start of the year. He's an interesting pick that I overall like the Texans took a shot on because why not when you're a bad team? Do you have anything to add? Are you ready to go to Offensive Rookie of the Year?
Let's go to the Offensive Rookie of the Year.
My Offensive Rookie of the Year, and this was easy for me because it's a quarterback award. It's going to go to the best quarterback. It's going to go to the quarterback that has the best production this year, and that's CJ Stroud to me. And I overall think he will be in the contention for overall Offensive Rookie of the Year. This is not just a division thing. I could see him winning it. But I think he's going to be a good quarterback. I think he's going to hit his receivers open. He's got a run game to help ease the box up for him with Dameon Pierce, as you said, Devin Singletary. They have talent around him. They have an offensive line. I could see him having a very, very good year one.
We agree.
He was kind of the chalk pick. Defensive Rookie of the Year. Again, going to the Texans Will Anderson. We talked about his on-play ability, his off-the-field things. He is the total package, and I do think he'll have a very, very good year at Houston. And if there was another guy, and I did consider it, I wouldn't rule out Julius Brents. He was someone I did consider, but I think Will Anderson, just as a pass rusher and as the guy who's probably going to get more reps, will win the award.
Actually, so what I have here is I have Will Anderson, and then I have honorable mention to Julius Brents and Adibare, just because I think that he is going to be unleashed.
Adibare, you liked him a lot more in the draft cycle than I did. He was a big question mark for me. But offseason addition, and I'm going to get my honorable mention out of the way. Actually, wait, no, you should go first because I think my honorable mention is who you'll have.
The best offseason addition?
Yes.
That's a good question.
Did you forget to write it down?
Yeah. Sadly, I did.
Okay, well then I'll handle this, and if you can think of it real quick. My best offseason addition was D'Amico Ryans. I think coming into Houston, he brings in the culture. He's the coach that I think is the right fit for them. I think he's the best offseason addition. My honorable mention was Calvin Ridley. And the reason why I didn't have him here, even though I do think he can have a dynamic day one impact, was because he was traded mid-season last year. I debated if I was going to include him in this because he was suspended. He didn't play, and this will be his first year. If you want to use Calvin Ridley, I fully understand it. For me, I just gave it to D'Amico Ryans on a technicality more than anything.
Well, that's ironic because if you remember, you asked me if we could use him, and I said, yes, I'm going to use him.
Yeah, I know. That's why I tossed it to you.
So division rank, where are you at with that?
Well, yeah, we still have 2 other awards. Coach of the Year
Go ahead.
and MVP. Coach of the Year, this is a 2-man race for me, and it depends on how you view it. I could give it to Mike Vrabel because I think he's going to squeeze blood from a stone, as I said earlier. I'm not the biggest fan of this Titans team, but I think the coach is going to get a lot out of them. But I look at this young team in Houston, and I'm going to ride the D'Amico Ryans train, and either I'm going to go on through and I'm going to look like a genius, or we're going to get in a train wreck, and I'm going to look like an idiot. D'Amico Ryans has so much young talent, so many young pieces here. I think if we get them working together and get to 6-7 wins, that's a major plus in the direction of the Houston Texans franchise.
I have Peterson, and the reason why I have Peterson is because when you look at where they were at 2 years ago, you're looking at where they were at last year, I think that they're going to end up in the AFC Championship game this year.
Ooh, that's a bold prediction, but we'll have to record that later when we can talk about that. But who's your MVP of this division, and why is it Trevor Lawrence?
Because it's sunshine.
Oh, God. If you heard that, everyone, that was my head just falling on my mic. So, Oh, you have something to add?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm just going to throw a division standings if you have something to add for MVP. Lawrence.
Okay.
So, division standings, I have 4th place the Colts. They're a big question mark. They're a huge question mark for me. 3rd place, I have the Texans. I do think they take a step forward. That's not enough to upseed the Titans, who I have at 2. I will say this, though. If the Titans suffer an injury at Tannehill or an injury at Henry or Jeffrey Simmons goes down, I could see them bottoming out and being last place in this division. Because I do not think the talent's there. But if their starters can stay healthy, I think they will be 2nd. And 1st is the Jags. Which now leads me to asking this question. If I told you midway through Urban Meyer's tenure at the Jacksonville Jaguars, and I told you 2 years from now they'd be the clear-cut pick to win the division, what would you say?
I would have said Urban Meyer wasn't there.
And you'd be 100% right. I bet you he's just kicking himself. He jumped off board.
He didn't jump. He was thrown.
Yeah. Is he a worse head coach than Bobby Petrino was in the NFL?
Yes.
Well, that's going to wrap us up for this week. Next, we have our final divisional preview in the AFC South. And then we'll have an NFL prediction show where we'll give you MVP of the league. We're banning Pat Mahomes to be used. Super Bowl teams, banning the Chiefs because they're overpowered. And who are some surprises that we're going to have to stay in tune for? So check back. That will be a smaller episode that will probably be released next week. And who knows if we will get to do AFC West at some point this week. I'll let you know on my Twitter feed. If you want to follow me, you can go at Jordan_J_Parish. And if you want to find my dad here, at Tony in Montana 1. Thank you everyone for tuning in, and have a great day.